Committee will come to order. I'd like to begin this hearing by stating the Oversight mission statement. We exist to secure two fundamental principles. First, Americans have the right to know that the money that Washington takes from them is well spent. And second, Americans deserve an efficient, effective government that works for them. Our duty on the Oversight and Government Reform Committee is to protect these rights. Our solemn responsibility is to hold government accountable to taxpayers because taxpayers have the right to know what they get from their government. We will work tirelessly in partnership with citizen watchdogs to deliver the facts to the American people and bring genuine reform to the Federal bureaucracy. This is the mission of the Oversight and Government Reform Committee. Today we are here to discuss the Department of Energy's strategy and process in reviewing applications to export liquefied natural gas, or LNG, specifically to non-free trade agreement countries. For countries with which we have a free trade agreement covering Natural Gas Act of 1938 when that began, and then obviously amended multiple times since then, it requires the Department of Energy to grant applications to export LNG. Such export is deemed to be consistent with the public interest, and the authorization must be granted without modification or delay. But for countries which we do not have a free trade agreement covering natural gas, the Natural Gas Act presumes the Department of Energy will grant the application to export LNG unless the Department finds the proposed exploration or exportation will not be consistent with the public interest. The issue we are here to discuss today is not if we should export natural gas. The U.S. has exported natural gas via pipeline to Canada and Mexico since the 1930s. We are also not here to discuss if we should export liquefied natural gas. The U.S. has exported LNG from the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska since 1969. Again, by statute, the Department of Energy must approve LNG exports to FTA countries, and so the default position is exports to non-FTA countries unless DOE finds that it's not consistent with the public interest. And finally, we're not here to discuss if we should export liquefied natural gas to non-FTA countries. The U.S., again, has exported to Japan from Alaska, which is not an FTA country, since 1969. And in the lower 48, May of 2011, the Department of Energy granted the first permit to export LNG to a non-FTA country. That facility is currently under construction in southwest Louisiana, and it will begin exporting LNG within 2 years. We're not even here to discover for the first time if the economic impacts of LNG exports. DOE has already commissioned and released the results of a two-part study. The first part was conducted by the U.S. Energy Information Administration, and the second part was conducted by NERA, Economic Consulting. David Montgomery of NERA was invited to testify today as well, but due to a last-minute scheduling conflict, has submitted written testimony for the record, which I'll ask unanimous consent to put into the record. The DOE studies concluded that for every one of the market scenarios examined, net economic benefits increased as the level of LNG exports increased, and that exports of natural gas will improve the U.S. balance of trade and result in a wealth transfer to the U.S. Two additional studies have also been commissioned on LNG by Brookings and Deloitte, which will testify here today on the risks and potential gains for our economy and global relationships. As a nation, we have already decided exporting is consistent with our public interest, and we will continue to export natural gas by pipeline and LNG to FTA and non-FTA countries. So really, the only issue here is how and when the Department will process the approximately 20 remaining LNG export applications in the queue. Every other applicant is now significantly behind the first permit holder, which was permitted almost 2 years ago, and it's essential that the process moves fairly and expeditiously. Today's question is really a narrow and simple set of process questions, although each answer has enormous implication for our international economic relationships and capital investments at home. When will DOE make its determination of public interest, and what are the specific criteria in that decision, especially since the law encourages a default yes answer to exports? The two DOE requested studies are complete. They both show a favorable gain for our nation when we export LNG. Now the comment period and replies are also complete. Will the DOE seek to limit the number of billion cubic feet that can be exported per day? Has DOE already set a certain amount of LNG to export, and if so, how was that limit chosen? Will DOE seek to limit the number of export facilities permitted and thus allowed to compete and explore for contracts worldwide? And what role will the market or geopolitical goals play in this decision? When can potential exporting companies begin competing for those contracts? There's not an infinite number of contracts that can be acquired worldwide. If we delay making the decision on permitting, other countries with a more efficient bureaucracy will beat us. The U.S. has a great head start in terms of technology, experience, pipeline infrastructure, and processing. We have developed financial and legal systems to support gas development, but these advantages won't last forever. There are massive shale gas fields around the world. China and India have invested in the Marcellus Shale in order to learn more about our technologies, and currently Australia has 8 LNG export facilities under construction. We have 1. The demand window is open. We can step through it, or we can delay until the window closes. If DOE intends to delay the decision to export to reduce the opportunity for global contracts, that is also something we should know. But I don't believe that is this administration's intent. In December of 2012, President Obama said to Time magazine, the United States is going to be a net exporter of energy because of new technologies and what we're doing with natural gas and oil. The President also recognized that these energy developments could have huge geopolitical consequences. For decades, energy has been used as a diplomatic tool against the U.S. Now with LNG, the U.S. has the potential to flip that and to be in a position to use energy as a tool to benefit our nation's strategic interests. Now the DOE has completed its first permit and developed a system. What will be the timing and system to permit the remaining applicants? With billions of private capital at stake, how can we make the process neutral, fair, and expedited? How quickly can that process be released? And how can we complete the process so that our nation can move forward with energy exploration, jobs, construction, midstream jobs, and the narrowing of our trade deficit. Uncertainty destabilizes a free market economy. It is time to provide timelines, decision-making criteria, and show the fairness of the process for everyone involved. I look forward to those answers and all these key issues today. With that, I would like to recognize the distinguished ranking member, the gentlelady from California, Mrs. Speer, for her opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding today's hearing. I look forward to an informative discussion on the Obama administration's process for reviewing the export of liquefied natural gas. New technologies in horizontal drilling and hydraulic fracturing have led to significant increases in U.S. natural gas production and a huge growth in our domestic gas supply. For the first time in modern history, America has the opportunity to become dramatically more energy independent. As USA Today reported last year, energy independence is no pipe dream. The U.S. is already the world's fastest growing oil and natural gas producer. Counting the output from Canada and Mexico, North America is the new Middle East. Furthermore, at our current pace of production, the Energy Information Administration predicts that the United States will slash its dependence on foreign oil to as low as 36% by the year 2035, down from some 49% in 2010. Many have called the natural gas a bridge fuel to a clean energy future due to its lower emissions compared to other fossil fuels. Right now, the natural gas producing and transporting industry wants to cross that bridge in part by exporting U.S. natural gas to foreign countries. Those foreign countries will pay a higher price for natural gas than is currently sold domestically. That means higher profits, more investment, and more jobs for the oil and gas industry. But many gas-consuming industries, including many businesses who, quote, are making it in America, unquote, want to cross that bridge in a different way. These are companies that use gas as a fuel and as input to make a variety of products ranging from chemicals to cars. They want U.S. natural gas to be sold into the domestic market at current prices, which will enable them to make higher profits and invest in more job creation. The domestic manufacturing industry warns that if we permit the export of large volumes of our domestic natural gas supply, prices for natural gas in the U.S. will increase. It is unclear what the consequences of a rush to export would be for American manufacturing jobs, as well as for many middle-class and lower-income Americans. I look forward to hearing from today's witnesses about the importance of natural gas to our manufacturing sector and whether those benefits have been overlooked or underassessed in the debate over liquefied natural gas. We are balancing two very important interests, those that want to export and those that want to retain the natural gas in the United States for consumers and for companies that make it in America. The Federal Government should proceed deliberately and carefully on LNG exports. In fact, the Federal Government is legally bound to determine what degree of LNG export is in the, quote, public interest before moving ahead on permitting new export facilities. Currently, the Department of Energy is fulfilling its duty under the Natural Gas Act of 1938 to evaluate the cumulative impacts of allowing the natural gas industry to export U.S. natural gas. The Department of Energy commissioned 2 reports from the Energy Information Administration and NERA Economic Consulting and is now reviewing more than 200,000 public comments on those reports, including many that are highly critical of the report's methodologies and conclusions. I would like to hear from our witnesses today whether they feel that the EIA and NERA's report's conclusions are comprehensive or leave important questions unanswered or inadequately addressed. I don't believe it is the job of DOE or the Federal Government to choose sides in the natural gas marketplace. This is not what the Natural Gas Act requires. However, it is the job of the Department to hear all sides and determine, on balance, how much liquefied natural gas export is permissible within the, quote, public interest, and to make sure that its decision is informed by the best data and analysis. Today's hearing should not be read as an opportunity to influence the DOE's process or to push on the scales of what is in the public interest. The Department is considering all views as it is charged to do by statute. Thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for holding the hearing, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses.
Thank you. I now recognize the Chairman of the full committee, Mr. Issa, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And up on the screen, I've got a slide that I think sets off something very interesting for us to bear in mind throughout the hearing. The two circled or drawn around areas are areas of major production, one of oil and natural gas at Eagle Ford, the other one of almost all oil, but with enough natural gas being flared today that it practically looks like New York City. That's the effect, in no small part, of artificially low natural gas. And I think one of the points that we have to make here today is that when natural gas falls too low, you end up with it becoming essentially waste fuel. That's not our goal. This is a valuable and clean energy. This is an energy that produces not just the methane that we think of as burnable natural gas, but the ethylene that we so often think of as for plastics and other uses, the propane, which is a highly portable fuel and America counts on. All of this and more in the way of byproducts are part of what we are hoping to get to. The other thing is, for those who talk in turn of clean energy and exports, I just want to point out that in 2012, the United States exported 126 million short tons of coal, a great deal of it to China, our largest partner in that. If you could visualize it, it's 1.4 million rail cars of coal. To a great extent, what we are trying to do is export a cleaner fuel, both in its raw form and, of course, if we burn it in the U.S. and use it in the U.S. in the form of exported products. I believe there's enough fuel, and the studies show there is, to do both. Additionally, today, with a roughly $3.90 cost of a million BTUs, that's about $21 equivalent to a barrel of oil. It is so cheap that, in fact, Burlington Northern has announced a $2 billion investment to convert diesel locomotives to work on natural gas. Now, for many people who find that interesting, let's make something more interesting. We're going to burn natural gas to haul coal to China. That's the reality of what we're doing, and that's how plentiful it is. I support all of the uses of both liquefied and compressed natural gas because, in fact, it is a clean fuel and a plentiful fuel and an inexpensive fuel, and it's going to be part of reducing our trade deficit. Mr. Chairman, in 2012, in spite of increased exports, we, in fact, had our largest trade deficit since 2008, a whopping $475 billion. So converting to using more natural gas, producing more oil as we are in North Dakota, all of this comes together to reduce our imports, increase our exports, make America more competitive. And for those who view, as they should, that as the lower a fuel stock gets, the lower a raw material gets, the better for the domestic business, I concur with them. But there comes a point at which a decision has been made by many companies that at $5.77, which is our 10-year average price for natural gas, they're going to bring those jobs to America because that is so much lower than the global price that, in fact, American businesses remain very competitive with this low-cost fuel. It's still half the cost of using comparable oil. And if you look to Japan, where they compete with us often, they're looking at nearly $20 equivalent to our $3.95. They pay a lot, and they are an important ally. And, Mr. Chairman, one of the most important things you're bringing about today is a discussion on our NATO allies who find themselves being held hostage both by the Middle East and by Russia, and our Asian allies who find themselves simply paying a very high price and feeling like fuel is part of their part of their diplomatic decision. The ability to export, at least in part, a portion from the United States, along with Australia and other countries who are also going to be increasing export, makes us better neighbors diplomatically, better allies. And I think last but not least, you pointed out very clearly, if we deliberately delay the ability to compete, 20-year-plus contracts will go to other nations and will not go to the United States. So we are not dealing with whether we do it today or tomorrow. We're dealing with whether delay is, in fact, working to the detriment of our long-term ability to compete in this important fuel. Last but not least, for those who say that natural gas prices will rise, when I've looked at the nature of export contracts, if we get back to the $12.69 peak in 2008 or above, the liquefied natural gas exporters will simply shut down that because it won't be worthwhile. So there is a natural stop point on all of this. I think for all of us who have viewed energy as an important tool of our national defense, an important tool of our economy, we have a windfall. We need to make sure we have enough of the windfall that we do not flare gas for lack of the price to support infrastructure development. And I thank the Chairman for this important hearing.
I'd like to recognize the Ranking Member of the full committee, Mr. Cummings, for an opening statement as well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. I have not reached conclusions. I've come here today to hear the witnesses so that I can be better informed. But today's hearing focuses on a very important energy policy question. Is it in the public's interest to export increasing amounts of natural gas to foreign markets overseas? That is the question. Because of new drilling techniques and other technology advances, the United States is now able to produce natural gas in geological formations that were once impossible to tap. This new technology has given rise to an emerging industry that is transforming parts of our nation. This recent boom has reduced the price of natural gas. It has saved consumers money on their electricity bills, and it is fueling a resurgence in domestic manufacturing. Our natural gas has become a competitive advantage in a global market. Because so much natural gas is being produced, paradoxically, it may be placing the natural gas production industry and the jobs in that sector at some risk. As prices fall, some producers may be faced with the prospect of suspending operations or even going out of business. To address that concern, some companies are now seeking to export gas to foreign markets. While that could be a very good thing for United States producers, it raises questions that must be addressed. First, will exports drive up prices for domestic U.S. manufacturers and consumers? Multiple studies have shown that they will. That will mean higher gas prices for consumers, higher prices for manufacturers we want to support, and potentially higher prices for goods and services for everyone. The producers contend that increasing exports will increase jobs, and that too must be a consideration. By converting import terminals to export terminals, there is likely to be an increase in the number of jobs in certain sectors. And God knows we need more jobs. But we also need to understand whether we will be supporting this set of jobs, those in the energy sector, at the expense of another set of jobs in the United States manufacturing that rely heavily on natural gas in their operations. Another question we must answer is whether exporting natural gas will more quickly deplete U.S. supplies, just as the country is moving towards greater energy independence. For years, we've heard that the United States must reduce its dependence on foreign energy sources. By increasing these gas exports, are we trading part of that independence for short-term profits? Third, complex environmental questions regarding some of the techniques used in gas production have not been resolved. I believe it's critical that we give ample attention to how increased production may exacerbate those concerns. Mr. Chairman, as we hear today, it is the Department of Energy's job to determine whether exporting more natural gas is in our nation's best interest. But we will also hear today that the studies commissioned by the Department are subject to debate. Some believe that recent studies demonstrate a clear benefit from gas exports, while others believe the studies point to the opposite conclusion. Although we may begin to answer some of these important questions at today's hearing, I believe we will also learn that there are a number of key questions that need to be more carefully studied. I want to thank you for holding this hearing. Mr. Chairman, with that, I yield back.
Thank you. And all members will have 7 days to submit opening statements for the record. We'll now recognize our panel. Mr. Tom Choi is the National Practice Leader for Gas at Deloitte Market Point, LLC. Mr. Paul Ciccio is the President of the Industrial Energy Consumers of America. Dr. Charles Ebinger is the Director of Foreign Policy in the Energy Security Initiative at Brookings Institute. Mr. Chris Smith is the Acting Assistant Secretary for Fossil Energy at the U.S. Department of Energy. Gentlemen, thank you all for being here. Pursuant to committee rules, all witnesses are sworn in before they testify. So if you please rise and raise your right hand. Thank you. Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? Thank you. Let the record reflect the witnesses answering the affirmative. You may be seated. Thank you. In order to allow time for discussion, I'd ask you to limit your testimony to 5 minutes. And watching our clock here, we expect votes somewhere around the next 15 minutes or so that will be perfect. What we'll try to do is to get through all of our testimony here. We'll start in the questioning time, and then if votes call us, then we'll put a temporary pause and then come back and continue questioning from there. And what I'd like to do is, depending on time in the questioning, just as soon as 2 of us get back, to start questioning again, and so we can try to finish up as quick as we can to honor your time as well. Is that all right?
That's fine with me.
That's terrific. So, Ms. Choi, you are up to bat first on it. I'd be pleased to be able to receive your testimony.
Good afternoon, Chairman Lankford, Ranking Member Speer, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify this afternoon. My name is Tom Choi. I am the Natural Gas Practice Leader for Deloitte MarketPoint. Deloitte MarketPoint has worked for a number of clients across different industries to help them better understand energy markets. In particular, we have utilized our world gas model to help LNG companies seeking objective and in-depth economic analysis of global gas and LNG markets. The key results of our model and our analysis form the basis for my comments this afternoon. The world gas model computes prices and quantities based on established microeconomic theories. It has been used by leading energy companies and institutions for over 20 years. Vital to this analysis, the world gas model represents natural gas producer decisions regarding when and how much gas to develop, given a producer's resource endowments and anticipated forward prices. The supply-demand dynamic is particularly important in analyzing the impact of demand changes, including LNG exports. Without a proper representation, the results would likely underestimate producer response and overestimate the price impact. It would be tantamount to assuming that the market would be surprised or unprepared for the volume of exports and in effect have to ration fixed supplies to meet exports as well as domestic demand. Our findings show that the price impact to the U.S. is likely to be modest. The impact of 6 BCF a day of U.S. LNG exports on average U.S. prices is projected to be only 15 cents per MMBTU from 2016 to 2030. Abundant North American gas resources, coupled with a market's demonstrated ability to respond to market changes, mitigate the price impact of exports. Since there is some uncertainty about the magnitude of the potential impact of LNG exports on domestic prices, an examination of the fundamental economic factors might be helpful. I think it's important to separate the timing issue, that is, how quickly new supplies can be brought online, from the resource depletion issue, that is, how increased demand affects future production costs and prices. Can the U.S. natural gas production keep pace with projected gas demand, including potential LNG exports? If history provides any indication, the answer appears to be yes. In just 4 years, from 2008 to 2012, U.S. dry gas production has increased by over 10 BCF a day, demonstrating just how dynamic the U.S. natural gas industry is. Hence, if export volumes can be properly anticipated and productive capacity made available when needed, then the price impact will likely be determined by how increased demand affects resource depletion and future production costs. Moreover, it's not just the gas fields feeding directly into LNG export terminals that respond, but rather the entire highly interconnected North American gas system. Since there is a large quantity of domestic gas available at similar production cost levels, and U.S. exports are projected to increase the price of domestic gas not by very much, because it's not likely to change the future production costs by very much. Our model also projects that natural gas prices will likely be more impacted in importing countries than in the U.S. As prices in the U.S. firm and prices in export markets soften, their price spreads will narrow. Hence, markets will check the volume of U.S. LNG exports, even in the absence of policy restrictions. Furthermore, if U.S. LNG exports are unlikely to cause U.S. prices to rise to the level of importing regions, the cost of liquefaction, shipping, and regas form a large price wedge between prices in the U.S. and those in import markets. Exports will only occur if large price spreads prevail, implying that sectors of the U.S. economy that compete in global markets will not likely see their price advantage significantly diminished as a result of LNG exports. In summary, given the dynamic nature of the North American gas market and the abundance of U.S. gas supplies available at similar cost levels, our model projects modest price impacts at assumed export volumes. Thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to addressing your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Choi. Mr. Ciccio.
Thank you, Chairman Langford, Ranking Member Spear, for the opportunity to testify before you and other subcommittee members. My name is Paul Ciccio, and I'm President of the Industrial Energy Consumers of America. IECA is a nonpartisan association of manufacturing companies with 1.4 trillion in revenues. We employ 1.4 billion employees worldwide. IECA membership represents a diverse set of energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries, including chemical, plastic, steel, aluminum, competitiveness is dependent upon the price of energy relative to our offshore competitors. The U.S. manufacturing sector is the largest consumer of natural gas as a fuel and as a feedstock, and natural gas-fired electricity, consuming approximately 40% of all U.S. natural gas. We also consume approximately 30% of the electricity. It is important to note that IECA is not opposing LNG exports, although we are very concerned that exports could negatively impact manufacturing competitiveness and jobs. It is for this reason that we urge the DOE to do a better job than what we've seen so far. Even though both DOE-sponsored studies used domestic demand assumptions, I should say understated assumptions, the outcome of the study should give public policymakers pause, because they confirm one thing, that any level of exports will increase domestic prices for all consumers. Natural gas prices have both direct and indirect impact on people's lives and their safety for homes, for heating, cooling, electricity, for the nation's economic growth, exports of manufactured products, and jobs. Energy-intensive manufacturing industries are especially impacted. Specifically, on page 7 of the flawed NERA study, confirmed that, quote, expansion of LNG exports has two major effects on income. It raises energy costs and, in the prices, depresses both real wages and the return on capital in all other industries, unquote. And from our perspective, with only trivial net benefit to the economy. My comments today will focus on two issues. First, we urge the DOE to implement a rulemaking process to determine public interest determination criteria that will be used on an application-by-application basis. Secondly, we also urge the DOE to complete the necessary studies to clarify implications of LNG exports to consumers, the economy, the manufacturing sector, using up-to-date domestic demand assumptions. DOE must include scenarios that consider pending legislative and regulatory actions that could impact natural gas production and spur domestic demand. Special attention is needed to address the impacts to energy-intensive, trade-exposed industries. The U.S. is at an important crossroad on the subject of LNG exports. If we do this right, the U.S. can export LNG and provide an adequate supply of natural gas at affordable prices to domestic consumers. If we get it wrong, the LNG exports could slow, if not stop, the manufacturing renaissance, and every U.S. consumer's price of natural gas and electricity will rise. So much is at stake. Today, the DOE is considering 24 applications to export LNG. In the modern era, the U.S. government has not faced the need to determine the public interest in connection with requests to authorize exports as large as this. The DOE has extensive experience evaluating import applications, but has limited experience with export applications. Perhaps not surprisingly, there are no clear established criteria for DOE to apply in determining the public interest with regard to natural gas exporting. IECA supports an approach to such determinations by DOE that are based on objective criteria and metrics established through a rulemaking process and applied on an incremental case-by-case basis, consistent and balanced in manner. We urge the Congress to embrace this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Eppinger.
Chairman Lankford, Ranking Member Spire, and other distinguished subcommittee members, thank you very much for inviting me here today to share my views on U.S. LNG export policy. My name is Charles Eppinger, and I am the Director of the Energy Security Initiative at the Brookings Institution and not the Director of the Foreign Policy Program, for the record. The Energy Security Initiative at Brookings has been studying this issue of LNG for the past 2 years, and last March issued a comprehensive report. In the interest of time, let me say the report had 2 primary conclusions. First, the negative implications of LNG exports from the lower 48 states are at best marginal and vastly are outweighed by the benefits. Second, as the linchpin of a globalized economy, the United States must continue to espouse free trade and avoid intervening in a global market. As we stated in our report, and I quote, "The United States should neither act to prohibit nor to promote export of LNG, but rather let the existing process with modifications work its way through." I won't spend much time talking about the economic implications because I think Tom Choi has done an excellent job of that, but merely to say we echo Deloitte's findings and that of other major public reports by ICF, EIA, and others, that we believe that the impact on domestic natural gas prices arising from exports would be only between 2 and 11% higher than they are today by the year 2035. Hardly a massive distress to the American public. We also believe that LNG exports are likely to have only a modest impact on electricity prices. And again, studies done by a host of leading economic consulting firms have produced a range of estimates, but the conclusion is profound, and that is that the average increase in electricity prices per megawatt hour might be somewhere between $1.40 to just under $5. Now, to put this in context for those that don't follow megawatt hour pricing, the EIA's annual energy outlook in 2013 estimates that by 2035, the average megawatt price will be $101 a megawatt hour, just nearly 95 times bigger than the increase in prices. Again, hardly devastating to the American consumer. I firmly disagree with the views of people who say we cannot export because it will hurt the prospects of an industrial renaissance in the United States. Today, the ratio of the price of oil to the price of natural gas in the world market is over 30 to 1, well over the 7 to 1 oil to gas price ratio at which the American Chemistry Council considers the U.S. petrochemical and plastic producers to be globally competitive. Let me turn quickly to the issue of geopolitics. Already we have seen the fact that cargoes that had been planned to be destined to the United States when we were forecast to import up to 40% of our natural gas in the near future have had a major transformation in the European market and have proven to be benefits to our European allies in both Western and Central Europe. The advent of LNG coming into that market has reduced the influence of Gazprom, the Russian monopoly, on the European gas market. And today, rather than dominating the European market, we see a situation where last month nearly 54% of the gas that flowed in Europe was under spot contracts, not under long-term oil index contracts, saving many of the nations huge quantities of money, particularly some of the more ailing economies in Eastern Europe. Already we have seen the impact that LNG exports can have on alleviating the terrible situations in Asia, with index pricing already beginning to come down away from oil and towards natural gas, which will be of vital assistance to our major allies. Finally, let me turn quickly to say we believe it is a prudent policy to continue to allow exports. We disagree with the two extreme proposals of a volumetric cap or a policy where the U.S. automatically approves all applications. But we do, as we say in our testimony in greater detail, we do believe there are reforms that may occur in the process, and we hope that they will be seriously considered both by our administration and by members of Congress with oversight on these issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you. After 30 minutes of talking about DOE, it would be great to be able to hear from DOE. We are honored that you are here and glad you are a part of this conversation. Mr. Smith, be pleased to receive your testimony.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So thank you, Chairman Lankford and Ranking Member Speer and members of the subcommittee. I appreciate the opportunity to discuss the Department of Energy's program regulating the export of natural gas, including liquefied natural gas. The boom in domestic shale gas provides unprecedented opportunities for the United States. Over the last several years, domestic natural gas production has increased significantly, outpacing consumption growth, resulting in declining natural gas and LNG imports. Production growth is primarily due to the development of improved drilling technologies, including the ability to produce natural gas trapped in shale gas geologic formations. Historically, the Department of Energy has played a critical role in the development of technologies that have enabled the United States to expand development of our energy resources. Between 1978 and 1992, public research investments managed by the Department contributed to the development of hydraulic fracturing and extended horizontal lateral technologies that spurred private sector investments and industry innovation, unlocking billions of dollars in economic activity associated with shale gas. Today, domestic natural gas prices are lower than international prices of delivered LNG to overseas markets. As in the United States, demand for natural gas is growing rapidly in foreign markets. Due primarily to these developments, the Department of Energy has begun to receive a growing number of applications to export domestically produced natural gas to overseas markets in the form of liquefied natural gas. The Department's authority to regulate the export of natural gas arises from the Natural Gas Act, which provides two statutory standards for processing applications to export LNG from the United States. By law, applications to export natural gas to free trade agreement nations are deemed to be consistent with the public interest, and the Secretary of Energy must grant authorization without modification or delay. For applications to export natural gas to non-FTA nations, the Secretary must grant the authorization unless, after opportunity for hearing, the proposed export is found to be not consistent with the public interest. The Department's review of applications to export LNG to non-free trade agreement countries is conducted through a publicly transparent process, which includes a full public interest review. To date, the Department of Energy has granted one long-term application to export domestically produced lower 48 LNG to non-free trade agreement countries. In the Sabine Pass order, the Department of Energy stated that it would evaluate the cumulative impact of the Sabine Pass authorization and any future authorizations for export authority when considering subsequent authorizations. Following issuance of that order, the Department undertook a two-part study of the cumulative economic impacts of LNG exports. The first part of the study was conducted by the Energy Information Administration and looked at the potential impact of additional natural gas exports on domestic energy consumption, production, and prices under several prescribed export scenarios. The second part of the study, performed by NERA Economic Consulting under contract to the Department of Energy, evaluated the macroeconomic impact of LNG exports on the U.S. economy with an emphasis on the energy sector and natural gas in particular. To date, the Department has received 188,000 initial comments and about 2,700 reply comments on these two studies. Now that all comments are received regarding the LNG export study, the Department will take into consideration the study, the comments, and the records of the proceedings of the 19 non-FTA LNG export applications. The Department will then make a public interest determination and act on each of these applications on a case-by-case basis. Due to the adjudicatory nature of this process, I will be unable to comment today on issues that are presently being addressed in our pending proceedings. Those issues include, but are not limited to, the merits of pending applications, the validity of the two-part macroeconomic study, the study's adequacy as a basis for decision, and the appropriate scope of environmental review. I can, however, speak to DOE's statutory authority, our process to review applications to export LNG to non-FTA countries, our two-part LNG export study, the comments we have received on those studies, and other recent developments in LNG export. With respect to those topics, the Department and I are committed to being as responsive as possible to any questions that the committee may have today. In conclusion, Mr. Chairman, I would like to emphasize that the Department of Energy is committed to moving this process forward as expeditiously as possible. The Department understands the significance of this issue as well as the importance of getting it right. And with that, I would be happy to answer any questions that the committee may have.
Mr. Smith, thank you. I ask unanimous consent to place into the record the statement of Dr. David Montgomery, the Senior Vice President of NERA Consulting. With that objection so ordered. We have a vote that has been called at this point. It is a single vote, and so that makes it rapid to be able to go over and to come back, and then we will take a momentary recess. I would like to reiterate something Mr. Smith asked and ask a personal privilege for the members of the committee when they go through the asking of the questions. I'd like for us not to get into a specific application from a specific company, where they are in the process, how they can move in the process. I think that's unfair to be able to ask Mr. Smith. Obviously, each of us can choose what we ask on our own time and our own questions, but I'd ask that as out of respect for DOE for being here and to be able to honor them in that process questions rather than a specific company and where they're moving our specific permit on that. So with that, we'll stand in recess for a single vote. We will return as soon as two of us get back here and continue on with our questions. Thank you.
Hello?
Thank you for allowing a short period to be able to recess and to be able to have the votes and be able to jump back into it. I'd like to recognize Ranking Member Ms. Spear for a quick motion.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to ask unanimous consent that the written testimony by the American Public Gas Association be submitted for the record.
Without objection. I'd like to recognize myself for 5 minutes and be able to ask questions, and then we will move back and forth and allow members to be able to ask questions. And if we have opportunity, schedule and allowing, we'd like to be able to do a second round if time permits for both the witnesses and for us as well. We're at a 14-year low of actually gas well producing rigs. Since 1999 was the last time we had this small of a number of rigs out there producing natural gas. It's an interesting dynamic to us to see very little production coming into the stream, but because we have so much currently being produced in the wells that are out there. That makes this conversation about the cumulative impact and the decision that's very difficult for DOE. The first export facility has been permitted. They're in the process of construction, will be done sometime 2 years from now. When you begin to evaluate from DOE perspective on cumulative impact, how will that work process-wise? Because obviously we have one facility, we won't really know the impact of that truly for maybe 4 or 5 years as we go through the process. So you have the 2 studies in hand, then now what on determining cumulative impact?
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for that question. So essentially the way that the Department has handled this, and I guess just to take a step backwards, when we issued the permit for Sabine Pass, in that permit we noted that for future applications, since we were looking at a queue of applications that were building up, that we would have to consider the cumulative impact of each of those applications in going through a public interest determination. So the first step that we did was to commission a study. The first part was conducted by EIA. The second part was conducted by NERA Economic Consulting. And the idea of doing these studies and offering the studies for public comment was to provide some sort of analytic rigor to looking at what's the production capability of the natural gas industry in the United States, what's the capability of the global gas market to absorb gas from the United States. So that was the process that we undertook. The NERA study is now back. It's been put out for public record. We've entered it to a public comment period and a reply comment period. We've gotten responses back. And so our job now is to evaluate not only the study that we received, which was done for the Department, but also the cumulative comments that we've received from stakeholders and individuals who are interested in the process.
Right. So how does that work now from here? Is the cumulative impact an economic impact, a forecasting? Is it a matter of they have to function for a while before that's determined, or can you do that off the study and the responses?
Well, that's the process that we're going through right now. So we've got something around 200,000 comments and reply comments that we're evaluating. So our job is to take the studies that have been provided, that have been put out for the public comment that are in the docket, evaluate the rigor of the studies, and also the opinions that we receive from other stakeholders.
Right. No, I understand that. I'm just trying to figure out, once it comes back, is the issue really just the evaluation from the studies, or will you have to wait to permit number 2, 3, or whatever it may be, if you permit 2 and 3, till after the existing facility that's under construction is done and is actually exporting? When will that decision be made? Yeah. Will it be before the export begins 2 years from now, or after?
So, the answer to that question can be determined by the analysis that we're currently undergoing. So the reply comment period just ended 3 weeks ago.
Right.
Right. So we're now looking at a tremendous amount of information we've just received.
Right.
Our job now.
But that's the reply on the initial. So you had the initial that went out, all those comments went out, and then there's a reply on that. So that's really the second phase of it, correct?
There are 2 periods. Reply was 45 days. Reply comment was 30 days.
Right. And
that was all.
Had those for 3 weeks, right?
Yeah,
okay. So then the question becomes making the decision. Is that now? Do you forecast the decision what to do with applications 2 and on after the facility that's under construction is already exporting, or before?
That could be determined by our analysis of the comment.
Okay, so it could be 4 years from now before the second decision's made, a decision on it. It could. Is there a time period you're looking at of when to make the next decision, or is it that wide open? Could be 10 years, could be 2 years.
I'm not in opinion to opine on something that's going to be based on a determination or an analysis we're currently conducting.
Wow.
So,
does DOE feel at all an economic pressure of what happens globally on these contracts? Now, by the way, I don't intend to pressure DOE. I'm just trying to figure out what's going on with this one way or the other. But globally, the contracts are going out. As I mentioned, there are 8 export facilities being constructed currently in Australia. Other countries are ramping up for this. There's a limited amount of time that we have to be able to compete on the global market and to be able to fulfill contracts out there. So if this is going to be 10 years, let's say, before one goes on, before the next facility is constructed, that's a significant lag to try to get those contracts. So the guess is, where do we go as a nation? So how big is that window you anticipate before a decision is made?
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to be in a position to put out a timeline for making decisions, because that timeline is going to be based on the very analysis that we're in the middle of conducting.
When do you think you'll have concluded your analysis? At what point? Do you think, as you go through all the comments, you're in the second phase of that, do you think that's another 45 days? Do you think it's another 6 months, another year? Give us a best guess on how that moves.
Mr. Chairman, it would be inappropriate and irresponsible for me to make a guess of how long it's going to take.
I would have to disagree. It's inappropriate to have an indefinite period of time to decide when you're going to decide.
Yeah, well,
at some point, there has to be something in your forecasting to think, we're going to decide by this point, and then the decision will be out from there.
The comment period ended 3 weeks ago,
Right.
and we're currently going through an immense volume of input. Many of the commenters have made comments very consistent with the points that you're making, so I understand the sense of urgency. I understand the importance of this decision for producers.
It's got to be right.
Right. And but we've got to make the decision in a way that's consistent with public interest and that withstands the scrutiny that it's certainly going to receive.
Thank you. We'll come back around. I want to recognize Mr. Spear, though, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Smith, let's get to what your challenge is, which is to determine whether or not approving or authorizing the process to move forward for liquid natural gas to be exported is consistent with the public interest. So can you be more specific about the criteria that you have got to include in that evaluation?
Thank you for the question. So the statute essentially creates a rebuttable presumption that exports are in the public interest. So it's our job to look at each application to make that determination. The law gives the Department of Energy considerable latitude in determining what that means. And in fact, you'd opine that when the law was written, one was not envisioning the export of natural gas from shale gas resources. That was just not something that was on the horizon. So our job has been to come up with a standard, which we're then going to have to defend when we write the order. So we're looking at a very wide range of factors that Americans care about, everything from balance of trade, creation of jobs, GDP, impact of prices on consumers and American families, impact of prices on American industry, energy security, environmental issues. So we have a very wide range of factors we have to consider. For me, it's kind of illustrative to be sitting next to Mr. Ebinger, Mr. Ciccio, and Mr. Choi, all professionals who I'm familiar with their work outside of this hearing, but all of whom have somewhat divergent views on what this means.
All right. Let me ask Mr. Ciccio. You said in your statement that any level of exports will increase costs of natural gas for consumers. That was pretty blanketed in that statement. So can you express more specifically?
I'm referring to the two studies, the first, the EIA study done in January of last year, and then the NERA study. And both of them used a broad number of volume of exports. And under every scenario, prices of natural gas rose. That's where our comment came from.
All right. So, Mr. Choi, you make evaluations based on whether or not they're good investments for the oil and gas industry. Is that correct?
Well, we have a model that looks at producer decisions based on a profit maximization objective for the producer.
Okay. So when you speak up, you're speaking from a perspective of it being advantageous for the producers as opposed to whether it's advantageous for domestic manufacturers or the domestic consumers, correct?
Yes. We have a model of the natural gas industry in which we represent producer decisions and also consumer decisions. Our model is different from most other models in that we represent the individual incentives by each of the parties. Okay, so it's not purely looking at the incentives for one particular sector, but rather representing the industry by looking at how each individual agent would make decisions.
Dr. Ebinger, I actually read your report, and one of the things you stated in the report was that there would be harm, certainly, or impact, I should say, to low-income consumers with the exportation of LNG, and that there should be some set-aside of whatever sales tax or revenue that the Federal Government gets to make sure that low-income people would have some form of subsidy because of the increased cost to consumers. Is that correct?
Yes, we did not go into great detail in looking at what that real impact would be, but it was certainly our conclusion that low-income consumers would have some price impacts. But again, I'd like to emphasize that taken in the wide sweep of the benefits of exports, however those needs are met for the low-income consumers, we believe overall the nation would be much better off with exports.
And then one final, actually maybe I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman, and do it in the second round. Thank you.
Dr. Gosar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, Mr. Ciccio, I mean, the rates are artificially low right now, are they not?
Natural gas prices are low, yes.
Yes. I mean, so it's we're not really being truthful to the American public, as the ranking woman was talking about. We're going to see a natural increase, because if we don't, we're not going to see production. True?
That's true. As a matter of fact, the NYMEX price between now and 2020 increases 44%.
Okay. Mr. Ebinger, when you just heard Mr. Smith's comments about timelines, how do you view that timeline from your perspective?
I view that timeline as very deleterious to the U.S. natural gas industry because, according to our analysis, by 2020, if you're not in the marketplace by one of our first few LNG plants, you're going to have very serious competition. The Chairman has mentioned the projects coming out of Australia, but in the early 2020s, we'll see major new gas projects arising in East Africa, Algeria, Angola, and many other places. Also, we remind people in our report that in the Asian power market, coal remains extremely competitive with LNG, and there's massive, despite our efforts to curtail global warming, we see massive new coal deposits coming on into the international market, so coal is going to be competing directly against gas. And as we move into the 2020 periods, and particularly the 10-year time frame that was potentially mentioned, I think we can assume that there will be at least a handful of additional countries that come up with their own shale gas development, be that in China, South Africa, Argentina, so that we're going to have more shale gas, we're going to have more LNG on LNG. There's the prospect of big pipelines coming from eastern Siberia and Russia to the Asian market, which will also compete against LNG. It's not going to be easy to finance a big LNG project when the competition is so great and you have to get your buyer to take a huge proportion of the sales in order to get the project financed.
From what you've seen of our previous history in this country about getting projects of this online, give me an estimate of getting it online by 2020. I mean, I'm constantly, my dad's a geologist, so 30 days, 90 days, 60 days, 120 days, 3 months, 6 months. I mean, they all come at cost, and it's irrespective, within the bureaucracy of government. So what's your best estimate on getting it done?
It's a difficult question to answer. I think it's impossible because DOE and FERC do have statutory responsibilities. That certainly.
But isn't there a way to streamline the process?
I would certainly think that the process, we could have some additional plants in the market by 2020, 2022, if we were able to get the process moving beyond the first Cheniere project, that we could probably see 2 or 3 projects in the marketplace by 2025, say. But I think anybody that thinks we're going to have more, or the fearmongers that list all the projects before DOE and FERC and argue that, if all these were built, we would collapse the international LNG market. We just see no scenario where that is going to happen.
I agree. Do you see the frustration, Mr. Smith, in regards to the protocol? I mean, looking at timelines, it's very, very frustrating to America not having a timeline that's equivocally pretty close to an outline. Does that make sense?
Well, and I appreciate that, Congressman. And, one thing I'd like to emphasize is that it's our job to get to a defendable, transparent decision as expeditiously as possible. We have a tremendous sense of urgency for this process. Many of the points that have been made by members of the committee and by my friends here on the panel have certainly been made multiple times on both sides of the fence in the numerous comments that we've received in our public comment period. So our job is to move forward as expeditiously as possible, but in a way that's open, that's transparent, and which yields a decision which will withstand the scrutiny that it's certain to receive. A point that we emphasize as we go through our own internal adjudication is that a decision that doesn't withstand scrutiny is not going to be useful for the concerns that you have, and it's going to be a wrong decision for the country. So this is something that's important. We're talking about a period of analysis that we've discussed here, but this is infrastructure that's going to be in place, if built, for decades. These are long-term decisions, and they're going to lead to long-term investments that are going to be important for our economy. We have to get this right.
But that's only if you do them within the time frame that it makes it economically feasible. If you don't, you're done.
Well, Congressman, on that, I'd state that I spent 11 years in industry before I came to the Department of Energy. I actually worked at Chevron when Chevron was working on the LNG import terminal at Sabine Pass, and I worked in that terminal. I did a lot of that commercial work. So these things, industry will move forward to build what it decides to build. Certainly, falling into a window where you think the market is open sometimes are good for the shareholders of that company, sometimes it's not. So it's not our job to opine on what the company should be doing. What we have to do is make sure that our process managed in the public interest, to make sure that we're looking out for the public interest of American businesses and families, is consistent, it's open, it's transparent, and it withstands scrutiny.
Thank you. Ms. Lujan Grisham.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm actually going to now reverse my order of questions because this is what happens when you're nearly last on a panel. Mr. Smith, given your now testimony and description of a pretty in-depth process to make sure that we get it right in terms of the public interest, and considering that we have trade agreements with our allies and we're mindful and watchful about those compliance issues, are you reaching out to those other Federal agencies and stakeholders when you're talking about those folks that you're working with in the public interest to get this right?
We're trying to be as open and transparent as possible, so we like input from a diversity of stakeholders.
I appreciate that, but are you also reaching out, or you're in a position to maybe maintain objectivity where you're waiting for people just to come to you?
Well, certainly the process works such that we have an open comment period. There's 45 days for entities to make comments, and then there's a reply comment period. So that's anything that we're going to consider as part of the adjudicatory process has to be entered into the public record, and so that's our primary vehicle for making sure that we've got a open and diverse group of stakeholders who are opining in the process.
Well, I would just encourage you on that note that without interfering with the due process required here and to get it right, and I am mindful and appreciate, in fact, that the public interest issues are paramount and to get this right so that we make the right decisions going forward, that you're also reaching out and coordinating with our other administrative partners who are going to have similar issues and interests. So I appreciate that and encourage you within the context of that process to do that. Right. Thank you. And Mr. Choi, I'm from New Mexico. I'm very excited about the positive potential here for natural gas and exporting liquid natural gas. In my home state, it accounts for 1/10 of the U.S. total, and two significant, the San Juan and Permian basins, neither of which, by the way, are in my district, but create really the economic foundation for our state. Now, unfortunately, as you all have indicated, that the low price of natural gas has led to a drop-off in natural gas production, and it's negatively impacted then many parts of New Mexico's economy, especially our tax revenues, our state tax revenues, that depend heavily on severance taxes and other revenue raisers from gas production. So in the context of difficult economic times, the prospect that we could increase natural gas exports and increase economic activity and create jobs in my state is particularly encouraging. But as you discussed, we need to examine the issue carefully and ensure that we are protecting consumers, domestic manufacturing jobs, and the environment as we consider exporting our surplus natural gas. And without reading the rest of that statement, I mean, the issue that I'm getting to, and you've talked about it in the short term, I'm really interested, giving the unnatural, and we can argue about that, the low price of natural gas today and the supply and demand influences. I want you to talk to me a little bit about whether the processes that we're undertaking today can bring stability on the long term for natural gas in terms of the price indexes.
Are you talking about the regulatory process or the market process?
Both.
Both? Well, excuse me. I'm more familiar with the market process, having worked with a number of companies. And I can tell you that they are undergoing a very deliberate and careful process, because a lot of the companies that are seeking to export LNG are the same companies that have been burned by building import terminals in this country. So they're not going to rush towards anything that puts their investments at risk. Part of the interest in exporting LNG is the abundance of natural gas that we have in this country. U.S. gas production has continued to increase. You might have seen a little bit of a decline in your home state because some of the production has shifted from dry gas areas to more liquids-rich areas. But the total U.S. production continues to grow. At the present time, I believe the market is more demand-constrained than it is supply-constrained. There are wells that have been completed but not yet connected just because there is a lack of demand or possibly because of lack of infrastructure to take the gas away to markets. Okay. So I believe the market is well-equipped to determine how much LNG exports would be economic. Of course, there could be some increase in price, but according to economic theory, any increase in demand will have some increase in price. So just because there's a price increase is really a pretty innocuous statement. The question is, how much of a price increase will there be? And according to our study, that price increase will be fairly modest because of how dynamic the market is and because of how much domestic resource we have in this country.
I'm just, given the huge fluctuations in the market, it'd be nice if there was a sense, given the potential here for broadening our exports, that we might be able to have a little more long-term stability in the market by the appropriate effort between the two, market supply and demand and a response and an appropriate regulatory environment, so that you don't have these huge fluctuations and you could get to then a place where we can do consumer protection by some other model, if necessary in that case.
I agree with that. Just because we have exports, I don't believe necessarily means that the price volatility would increase in this country, because in addition to exporters securing long-term markets through long-term supply contracts, they'll also have supply contracts or supplies that are ready to support their export terminals. So the supply will respond to the increase in demand.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you very much. At this point, I think I'm actually up next on the list right at the time I take the center chair, so that's perfect timing for me. So I'll now recognize myself for 5 minutes. Mr. Choi, you talk about an abundance of natural gas and not a whole lot of price volatility with the addition of exports. Can you give us an idea just how much natural gas we think there is in some of these new shale finds?
Well, it's not just shale finds. It's the total domestic resource base, which includes conventional supplies, shale gas, coal bed methane, and other types of
So you just assuming projected growth in world demand, what are we? How many years supply are we looking at?
Well, by most accounts, we have over 2,000 TCF of natural gas in the United States. At our current production levels, that's equivalent to about 100 years.
And that's assuming no tech. And in shale gas, we only recover with our fracking technology, what, about a third of what's there with today's technology?
Well, the technology is constantly improving, and we're able to recover more. The shale gas comprises a growing share of our total U.S. production.
All right. And Mr. Smith, are you familiar with the concept of being in the right place at the right time? I mean, that's where you want to be, right?
You'd have to clarify that question.
Okay, I guess what I'm getting at is that I don't know whether it's coincidence or divine providence or whatever, but to me it looks like our technology in the energy industry is pulling this country out of a recession kicking and screaming. And we probably need to, I'm going to mix my metaphors here, strike while the iron is hot. If the blacksmith industry had to go through a burdensome regulatory process while the tire industry were developing, we'd miss the ability to sell a lot of horseshoes because cars come into existence. I guess what I'm getting at is the federal government is spending a lot of money on alternative energies. I think a breakthrough in battery technology makes a whole lot of alternative energies work a whole lot better. Are we not possibly at a unique time in history where we've got a lot of natural gas, there's a market for it, and we could make some money off of it if we did something now?
Well, Congressman, what I can say is that there are certainly a large number of commenters of the 200,000 comments we're going through now that have made exactly the point that you're making. So we certainly have a sense of urgency to, as expeditiously as possible, get to a open and transparent public interest.
And I know Chairman Issa showed this slide where you can actually see in the dark the Bakken field and the Eagleford shale down in Texas, which I'm blessed to have touch the district that I represent. I'm also going to show you a map. This is a Baker Hughes map that shows all the rigs that are currently in production. The red ones are gas. The blue ones are oil. There's no gas being produced in the Balkan because there's no market for it, and at the current prices, they can't afford to build a pipeline. So they're basically just burning it. I mean, it's a huge waste of what is potentially a very valuable resource. We're seeing gas prices that are just above $3, $3.25 or so in Texas. It's great for us. We've got steel plants coming in. We've got plastic plants coming in. We've got LNG companies looking to come in and export. And you see, we've got some red ones because we have the pipeline infrastructure to do it and market. But what we hear from producers is, in addition to having to get pipelines, which are expensive to build, and another regulatory burden, I only need to say the word Keystone, that's a problem. But then you zoom in down here and see there are also gas wells offshore in Louisiana. And these are traditional horizontal wells. You're not seeing the development of the gas wells because you can't produce a horizontal gas well at $3 gas. What gas we're getting out of these horizontal wells is being produced along with oil or other liquids. So it's not economical to even pursue it. We could lose this boom if we don't get a market. I guess I just want to make sure that y'all are aware of the urgency of getting this done. And then you look at what's going on now in Japan after the terrible tragedy there. They're looking to decommission their nuclear facilities and go with natural gas. Wouldn't it be cool to actually have something to sell them back for all those electronics that we're bringing over here to get the balance of trade? This is the time, and I just want to make sure you guys understand that. There really is that sense of urgency.
And thank you for those comments, Congressman. I mean, those are all factors that we're considering. I grew up in Fort Worth, Texas, in the Barnett Shale. I've seen firsthand the difference that some of these developments can make. But we also understand all the other balancing factors. And if we want to make sure we make a good public interest determination, we need to move forward as quickly as possible, but in a way that's open.
And I appreciate that. And I'm a relatively newcomer in Washington, but I do know one of the best ways to kill something is delay, and I hope any delay we're doing is necessary and not intentional. So my time has expired. Who's up next? I'm sorry. Mr. Osford, you're up next for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to the panelists for being here today. I'm from Nevada, and we also have natural gas facilities in our state, and important. It's both a blessing and a curse. On the one hand, prices are at an all-time low. These low prices have benefited the manufacturers, the consumers, and household users. But on the other hand, these low prices are adversely affecting many producers of natural gas. So going forward, as policymakers, we have difficult questions to answer. And one of the areas that I feel that we have to address beyond corporate profitability also pertain to our security, jobs, and households. So I'd like to ask the panel, if you would, Mr. Cicio, is that correct? You say in your testimony that your organization is not opposing LNG exports, but that you, quote, remain very concerned that exports could negatively impact manufacturing competitiveness and U.S. jobs. Why is that, and is there a way to calculate how many U.S. manufacturing jobs could be lost or not created if LNG exports are allowed to proceed?
Well, it's difficult to answer the second part of your question. What I can do is tell you that these prices has started clearly the manufacturing renaissance. There are upwards to $95 billion of new capital investments by chemical companies, nitrogen fertilizer for plastic, steel, glass. And these new facilities are going to create upwards to 6, 8 BCF a day. We're talking about just those announcements, maybe a 10% increase in demand of natural gas. And every month, there are new announcements. In our view, when I talk to my companies, this is the first wave. The commodity, as we call them, the building blocks, the kind of companies I mentioned, they supply energy-intensive building block products to every manufacturer in the country. As this new capacity for this building block materials of plastics and chemicals and nitrogen fertilizer comes on stream, our customers will be expanding. So we are quite optimistic about the demand side, but it is very difficult to, other than to do a study, much like the DOE has done, to determine what negative impact it would have on at a specific price going forward.
Okay, so then, as we've heard, those in the oil and gas sectors believe that failure to permit foreign exports of LNG could severely undermine that industry. This would ultimately affect current and future jobs. Do they have a valid concern, do you think?
Manufacturers have a valid concern. Yes, they do. Higher prices. We just look at from 1999. Natural gas prices doubled, then tripled, and then they peaked at 2008. In that time period, I saw almost 55,000 manufacturing facilities shut down. A lot of it was related to high prices of natural gas. And so there is an absolute relationship between the price of natural gas, the price of electricity, and manufacturing competitiveness.
So is there, though, the proposition of, you said kind of the winner-take-all, where it's to the benefit of one sector to the detriment of another?
No.
Can there be a balance?
Yeah, that's correct. And our testimony bears this out. If we have a process that at the Department of Energy that takes into consideration the public interest and balances, we should be able to export, and we should be able to provide affordable prices of natural gas for domestic consumers.
Mr.
Yes.
Choi, what do you say about that?
Well, first of all, I think we need to realize that between 2004 and 2008, U.S. natural gas prices rose to unprecedented sustained level. Prices during that time ranged from about $7 to $10 per MMBTU. Nobody that I'm aware of is saying that exports will bring prices up to those levels. The advent of the shale gas revolution, which really used the hydraulic fracturing and the horizontal drilling to make vast amounts of shale gas economic, has fundamentally changed the picture. So even with exports, we're not going to see prices at that level likely in the future.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll wait for additional questions.
Thank you very much. It's an interesting hearing where we see this side of the aisle agreeing with the DOE and Brookings, and not always with the industry. I'm sorry. We'll go on. At this point, I need to ask for unanimous consent for the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming, to sit as a member of this subcommittee. Without objection, so ordered. Up next in our roster is Mr. Turner. Mr. Turner, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is I appreciate our panelists, because this is certainly an important discussion as we look to the issue of job creation and energy policy. In Ohio alone, it's expected that Utica Shale would have a $5 billion economic impact and create or supply nearly 66,000 jobs in Ohio by 2014. And I appreciate the discussion that we certainly have great opportunities to export, and that the price spikes that we had in the past, of course, were a result of the fact that we didn't have the access to or the abundance of supply that we're now seeing. Dr. Ebinger and Mr. Choi, in your reports, you both touched on the issue of the geopolitical implications of exporting U.S. natural gas, and I'd like to speak to that for a minute and ask you a question. When we look to the U.S. interests and certainly domestic economic benefits, we also need to look to the issue of the geopolitical implications of our being able to export. As both of you have noted, Russia has a major role as a supplier of natural gas and is a non-reliable exporter to the European countries. They use it as a political tool, punishing our European allies, especially in Eastern Europe, and use it to try to divide the EU and NATO countries as they put pressure on individual countries to adopt policies favorable to Russian positions. I have a bill that is H.R. 580, the Expedited LNG for American Allies Act, that would expand the ability to export LNG to our NATO partners and to Japan, to allow expedited approval for that export. This is a bill that initially had been championed by Senator Lugar. It is a bipartisan and a bicameral piece of legislation. I think it would be very important to give that expedited opportunity for export, not only just increasing our markets, lowering the overall bureaucratic process for export, but also having an impact in the Pacific region and with respect to Russia's export. Dr. Ebinger and Mr. Choi, would you please elaborate on your positions, your thoughts as to the geopolitical effects of U.S. exports into those regions?
Thank you, Congressman. Yes, I would thoroughly agree with your characterization of what LNG cargoes diverted from the U.S., since we no longer need them, have played in the European market. Of course, the big reason for that is in most of the world outside the United States, petrochemicals are derived from naphtha, an oil-based product, rather than from natural gas, making them much more costly. And we have seen LNG cargoes allow the Europeans, as some of their long-standing contracts with Gazprom have come up for renegotiation, to use the availability of natural gas to delink a large portion of their supply from Russia, and in some cases get price concessions, significant price concessions from the Russians. My only concern about your bill, and I think it's very admirable, and we certainly support our NATO and European allies, is that one has to be very careful, because having just returned from a significant gas conference in Amsterdam, it does appear, listening to the Europeans, that they believe for the next 10 years the European gas market is saturated. Part of that is, of course, the depressed economic conditions prevailing in Europe, which obviously can switch around at some point in time, we hope. But I would only caution that if we were to direct U.S. LNG cargoes there, it might be good that we could drive prices down further, but it might not necessarily be good for our own exporters if they found that to penetrate that very glutted market, they had to significantly
As you know, the bill doesn't redirect, it just streamlines the bureaucratic processes for those who are doing that.
Yes. In our latest paper, we looked at the the global implications of U.S. LNG exports. And in order to understand what the impacts would be, you have to look at each market and examine what the marginal source is. And the marginal source might not be just what is currently being exported. It could also be future supplies. And these supplies could be marginal either because they have high production costs or high transportation costs, or possibly because of political hurdles that make these supplies effectively more costly to come to market. And I'm talking about the supplies such as from Iran or possibly Venezuela. You mentioned Russia. Now, Russia is the largest gas exporter to Europe. They're vulnerable, according to our study, because not only do they have the largest volumes, but they're also the highest cost contract supply to the European market. So we believe that if U.S. exports to Europe, which is one of our scenarios, Russian supplies would be vulnerable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. We will now recognize the gentleman from Louisiana, Dr. Fleming, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I thank the committee for allowing the courtesy today to sit in, and I appreciate the panel here today. I come from the 4th District of Louisiana, which has the Haynesville Shale. The Haynesville Shale, as you know, in the period around 2007-2008, we had nothing less than a revolution in marrying the old technology of hydrofracking and the new technology of horizontal drilling, which has released tremendous wealth and economic activity, which has really sustained my district through difficult economic times. But we're victims of our own success, unfortunately. As a result of that, as you know, the price has been well displayed here, has been depressed because of all of the production. And so we've gone from excessive demand and little supply to excessive supply and relatively the same demand, which is kind of interesting because our friends on the other side of the aisle assure us that the high cost of gasoline and oil has nothing to do with supply and demand. It's speculation. So we'd like to have a little speculation in natural gas, if that would be okay with you, gentlemen, just to get that price up a little bit, because we've had a number of actually drilling sites that we've not moved forward on because it's just not economically viable. The other piece is in Lake Charles, we have the Cheniere plant, which is an import, an incoming supply depot for LNG, because we've been net importers, right? Well, now they're spending $10 billion to make it a net export facility, and we're glad about that. So we're going to be well positioned for the future to not only take care of our own needs, but to take care of the needs of the world when it comes to this revolution. So I have a couple of questions today. Mr. Smith, what are the criteria for approving one terminal over another? Is geography a factor, a region already has a facility, or other projects that may be less advantageous? So what really is, how do you decide about that? Because we are waiting on final permitting and approval with our plant.
All right. Well, thank you, Congressman, for the question. As you're aware, and I think as you stated in your comments, we've already approved one export facility, and that's the Sabine Pass facility there in Louisiana.
Right.
So subsequent to that, now that we're looking at cumulative impact of another additional, I think, 28.2 billion cubic feet a day of potential exports, one of the things that we've announced as we go through our process is that we do have a queue. We've got a sequence that we're going to use in order to determine the order in which we're going to evaluate the export opportunities. What we did is we took all of the applications, all the applicants before the Department. We divided them into two categories, ones which had submitted their FERC pre-filing application, which is really the process where you start spending more significant quantities of money, and then those who had not filed FERC pre-filing. So within those, it's on first-come, first-served basis. So there is a list, there's a PDF on the DOE website. You can see what the next applicant we're going to consider is. You can see what the last applicant is. And we're going to work through that queue, looking at all the factors that we've announced as part of our public interest determination, everything from jobs, balance of trade, economic impact on consumers, prices, impact on industry, international issues, economic and environmental issues, a wide range of factors that we're going to use in order to evaluate each one of those applicants.
Do you do some in block, or are they all one-on-one?
So our sequence is going to be we're compelled by statute to evaluate each of these on an individual basis.
Okay. What about the non-FTA countries? What's the policy towards them? Are they still in the queue?
All right. So the law breaks up applicants in two categories, FTAs and non-FTAs. So free trade agreement countries essentially are approved without delay or modification by the Department. There's no discretion that's exercised under statute by the Department. So those are being approved as we receive them. It's the non-FTA applicants that we're evaluating. Okay.
Now, is that to say that there's going to be difficulty approving them? What are going to be the challenges in getting approvals for them?
Well, there's a process. So I think for me, as I'd mentioned earlier, it's illustrative that even on this panel, you've got individuals who think they should be approved immediately, and all of them should be approved. There are a lot of voices who think that there are concerns with exporting LNG in terms of rising prices. There are lots of arguments that are being made. We've received somewhere in the order of 200,000 comments in addition to the studies that we've received, and some of which we've requested. And it's our job to look at all of the factors so that as expeditiously as possible, as transparently as possible, and as quickly as possible, we get to a public interest determination that's going to inspire the right type of confidence in terms of its ability to withstand the scrutiny that it's certain to attract. And that's the process that we're in right now, Congressman.
Right. Well, anyway, I certainly want to underscore that we should encourage approval of non-FTA countries as well. It will be good for the global economy. It will help our prices. Again, you've just heard that we have more natural gas now than we ever thought we had in the past, and probably with newer technologies coming online, we'll have even more in the future. And it's not that we want to drive prices up. We want prices to be at real market rates. That's going to be the sweet point for, I think, consumers and for jobs. With that, I yield back, and again, thank you for your courtesy.
Thank you very much. And at this point, we'll start a second round of questioning. I'll recognize myself for 5 minutes, and we'll move over across the aisle. Mr. Ciccio, the gist of your concern is that as we start to export natural gas, there will either be a shortage or an increase in cost of natural gas that's used either as a raw material or feedstock for domestic manufacturing and to keep domestic electricity prices low, as natural gas is certainly in Texas a major source of energy. Is that a reasonable summary of what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
No. Natural gas is different. That's what makes this public interest determination so critical.
Okay, so
natural
natural
gas is very influenced by the public process. There is legislation and there is regulation that can impact the ability, the access to natural gas in terms of whether it's in a moratorium or not. The Congress can deal with the intangible drilling cost tax benefit, and that's going to change the economics. You can have changes.
Can't that argument be made for any?
No.
Intellectual property is highly regulated. Music, their ability to profit is determined almost entirely on government regulation of copyright. We could go in and regulate almost any other industry. Mr. Choi, do you agree with that characterization that natural gas is unique over any other product or commodity?
No, I wouldn't. First thing I would note is that, at the margin, there are some regulations that affect the amount of drilling. But for the most part, we have deregulated supply markets, and the market determines how much to produce.
All right. Thank you very much. And Mr. Ciccio, let me ask you this. As we get more natural gas through pipelines to our ports, doesn't that make the liquids that are oftentimes produced with natural gas, doesn't that make more of those available to your industrial customers to use for other products?
Drilling for natural gas, drilling for oil. I mean, it increases potentially natural gas liquids. So the answer would be yes.
All right. And so, again, using your argument with respect that natural gas is special, does that mean we should add regulations to the export of other basic chemicals like ethylene and propylene?
I will say it again, natural gas is different because let's say if DOE approves a terminal, they are approving it for up to 30 years. The terminal operator then negotiates long-term contracts that are mostly take or pay. That locks in demand for a 30-year period of time. Meanwhile, consumers are exposed to the risk of public policy on the production side and on the demand side of natural gas.
Can any consumer, whether they're an electric company generating for the public, or negotiate a long-term contract just the way exporters can?
No.
Why not?
There is very, very few long-term natural gas contracts negotiated.
At $3 and something of MCF, I might be negotiating long-term ones myself.
We would like to do so, but it's not happening.
Mr. Ebinger, would you like to comment on this line of questioning?
Congressman, I would only say I'm old enough to remember when we couldn't burn natural gas in industrial boilers or power plants because, quote unquote, it was the noble fuel, and we shouldn't do that. We've made major disastrous decisions through the years whenever we try to not allow market forces to work. And it's precisely for that reason that in our analysis we see plenty of NGLs being available for the American industrial renaissance and use the dry gas for export. But again, as I said formally in my testimony, I think we have to be careful because this idea that Dr. Fleming, I think, seems to think, and I would agree with you, sir, I would love to see more natural gas exported, but we think the realities of the marketplace are not going to allow all these projects before DOE to ever be developed in any time frame any of us can reasonably foresee here. So as a result, we find some of the arguments put forth by the petrochemical industry and others to be somewhat spurious to the realities of the marketplace.
All right, and let me ask Mr. Choi, you studied this. What's the environmental impact of this? It seems to me that as we have low-cost natural gas that is cleaner burning than, say, oil and certainly, in most cases, coal, isn't it a positive net environmental to get more people burning clean natural gas?
Yes, it is. If you look at the carbon emissions in the United States, we're at, I believe, about the lowest point we've been in the past decade. And most of it is because we're burning more natural gas than we ever have. One other comment I'd like to make is that just because there is a rush to apply for DOE approvals to export doesn't necessarily mean that all these applications, if approved, would be built. I believe
Thank you very much, and I apologize for cutting you off, but I'm out of time, and as a courtesy to my colleagues, we do need to keep moving. So I'll now recognize Mr. Horsford for 5 minutes and turn the chair back over to Chairman Lankford.
Thank you. I want to delve back to this issue of who all should be involved in this process. Mr. Choi, would you agree that all interests, those of the producers and those of the consumers, should be considered by the Department of Energy in their determination of what is a public interest? Mr. Choi?
I would rather not speculate on the role of the Department of Energy, but I can say that the market does consider interests of all parties.
Okay, Mr. Ciccio, again, I think from what I understand, you are here representing some very large companies that are natural gas that use natural gas as an energy source and as an input in their production process. What's your view on being able to have a say in this process?
Well, absolutely. All interested parties impacted on the producing, on the consumer side needs to. And let's take a look at when the DOE was confronted with dealing with determination on imports. They did a rulemaking process to develop the criteria and allowed for all parties to comment, both verbally and in writing, to help develop that criteria, and it was done in a very transparent way. As my comments earlier today is that there has not been any rulemaking that has allowed for a set of criteria for exports, and that is what we believe is the best process to move forward.
And the fact that the NERA report accurately estimate the impact of exportation on your member companies, that's a concern.
It's interesting. The NERA report said that probably, it said that all energy prices goes up, wages go down, and the return on capital of all industries are impacted in a negative way.
So, I mean, Mr. Chairman, I think what this hearing, demonstrates, at least to me, is that there are many sides to the question of allowing LNG exports on a scale never before considered in our U.S. history. And the law requires the Department to do what's in the public's interest. And I know that none of us want to be motivated to pushing the administration into picking winners and losers. And it's something that, of course, the majority has talked about, not only in this committee but in others, and has objected to that type of consideration. So, the last Congress, I know, is in the past, but I just would hope that we would not do anything to try to push the administration into selecting winners and losers in this process. At this hearing, which concerns something the oil and gas industry wants, Federal permission to export LNG and thereby raise gas prices and profits, I get the feeling that some members of the majority want the administration to go in this direction, and so long as oil and gas are the winners. And I hope that we have the public's interest in mind rather than merely just one industry's welfare or profit. Thank you.
I recognize myself in the next line of questioning. And, Mr. Horsford, I would agree this shouldn't benefit one group or another, but there are tens of thousands of jobs on the sidelines currently that in a 7.6% unemployment rate for the nation, we would love to see. And the jobs that are happening in, take an area like North Dakota, an area where there are a lot of jobs that are 80,000 and above as a starting position for a high school education, would be great to see those promulgated across the country. A lot of families would enjoy that kind of benefit, to see that in the days ahead. Let me try to come back, and I apologize that I had to slip out for a moment, be able to come back to it. I need to come back to several things on this. Still trying to process through the actual how we make the decision and how we move forward in timing on this. Mr. Smith, is DOE anticipating setting a numeric number of BCF to export a day? Is that an expectation there'll be some moment or some decision to be made to say we're going to find a magic number of BCF, we're going to limit that?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. And the Department has not made any determination about a volumetric limit or cap or any sort of quantified figure, so that's not a determination that the Department has made.
Okay, so that won't, either that decision has not been made or that decision is irrelevant. It's going to be market based. What I'm trying to figure out, will this be centrally determined that someone in DOE will determine we can do up to 6 BCF a day, but that's all we can do economically based on studies, or will the market decide how many?
No, the Department has made no determination about the imposition of any cap, quantification of any cap, the calculation of any cap. So that's not a decision the Department's made. We've not come to that conclusion.
You've made a decision at least 2 BCF are going to happen a day, because that's the existing export facility has that capability of 2 BCF a day, correct?
Well, we've decided to permit Bcf per day.
Correct. But then I'm trying to figure out, where does this go from here? Is it a situation where we have 19 applicants out there, we're going to let the market decide what is appropriate, or will there be some decision to say, okay, we have 2 to permit, we're going to allow 2 more, then we're going to wait a couple of years, we're going to allow 2 more and wait a couple of years, or is it going to be a decision to say, we think 8 is the limit, and we're going to try to figure out some process to get us to 8?
Mr. Chairman, we simply have not made that determination.
Okay.
So we're in the process right now of making this determination. The comment period literally closed 3 weeks ago. So there's a very large volume of analysis that the Department still has to do.
Well, I do have to tell you, I have some concern on the large volume, because there's 186,000 individuals, but my understanding is that was about 300 actual comments, and they all came in the thousands. Am I right or wrong on that, that there's really 300 comments that you're working through, just a large quantity of those same 300 comments?
There's a total of almost 200,000 comments.
Right, but
many of those were letter writing campaigns.
Right.
But those also you have to go through, because in any campaign, people write things. I mean, you have private citizens who are voicing their opinion, and those opinions have to be considered and respected by the
definitely
Department.
understand that. Listen, from a congressional office, I understand that. We get letter writing campaigns, I can assure you. But the comments as they come in, as far as your decision making, you have 300 unique comments that are really there. You have thousands to reply to. But as far as in your decision making process, you're really filtering through 300 of them. Is that correct?
I don't want to characterize the 300 as being unique from the other very large volume, because, again, we have to go through all those comments.
Sure. No, I understand. I'm just trying to figure out a decision-making process, because as we're trying to process through this, the assumption was the decision has been made, we're going to export to non-FTA. That decision is done. It's behind us. We're going to do it. Now it's how many additional facilities, what will the process, what will the time be? That's all that's left at this point, is to determine. We've already determined we are going to export. So what I'm trying to figure out is the timing, because there are a lot of contracts globally that are dependent on this. There are a lot of jobs here in America scattered across, as Ms. Luan Grisham mentioned before, in New Mexico and in other areas all across the country that are dependent on job development increasing. And with a 14-year low in production of natural gas happening right now, that's a lot of jobs that are sitting on the sideline that turn around almost immediately if production begins to increase for export, if there's some sort of advanced planning, if we know the timing. I'm just trying to figure out what's the time and what's the process.
I can say a couple things, Mr. Chairman. First, we are committed to dedicating resources, to dedicating personnel, lawyers, subject matter experts, to move as quickly and expeditiously as possible to get to a transparent, defendable decision.
But we still don't know whether that's a month from now or 10 years from now.
Mr. Chairman, we're in the middle of the analysis right now. I mean, I could opine on that, but I would be making something up that's going to be trying to foresee the outcome of the analysis that we're currently doing.
Do you have an expectation when you make a decision, will they be made one at a time, or will it be based on a set of merit where you'll say, this is the criteria, if your permit application meets the set of criteria, we're going to permit you, and then just let the market decide? Or will this be, okay, whatever system it was, we're going to permit this company, and then 3 or 6 months later, whatever it is, we're going to permit another one? Will it be that order, or will it be open it up and let them go pursue capital and see who gets the capital and who gets contracts? How will that work?
Yeah, well, again, that would be, to a large extent, prejudging the analysis we're doing now. What I can say is that we've announced an order. We know what the next applicant is going to be, what the subsequent applicant is going to be.
And how was that determined as far as the order that the next one's going to go down?
Yeah, so what we did is, in the Sabine Pass order, we stated that we had to look at the cumulative impact of the LNG exports. So since we're looking at a total of 28.2 BCF with a number of applicants, we took.
But there's no way they're going to build that much. There's not that much capital to build that. I mean,
and that's not the argument that I'm making. I'm just saying that's the total quantity of export applications that we're looking at. So we took the applicants in first come, first served basis, with priority given to those that have started the FERC pre-filing process.
Okay.
So you can go to the DOE website. You can download a PDF that shows you the list, the order, and that's the order we're going to proceed in.
So it's a first come, first served. If they've gone through and done the pre-application, that's fine in some semblances, and I'm sure for the company that's number 2, they're excited about that process, and the company that's number 19 is probably not as excited on it, on the process. And I don't get who's in between on that.
Right.
I just know from being in a high school history class, when tests were turned in on Friday, the first person that turned their test in didn't always get the highest grade.
Right.
And so a process that says whoever got this application request in first, and it started with FERC, has the highest priority, seems to pull out some merit issues. Now, again, I'm probably saying that the number 2 company is furious I'm saying it, but there seems to be some need for merit. Do they have the capital? Do they have contracts? Have they had communication on this? Can they actually fulfill it? Is this going to economically benefit the nation? If we make the determination to do it, then we need to have some economic benefit come back to America immediately on it, that we know they're actually going to be able to fulfill it and get it done. Does that come into play on this at all?
Well, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the comment. First of all, a couple of comments on that. First, in order to get a permit before Department of Energy, you essentially need $50 and a fax machine, and we get the application and it goes into the docket. So one of the ways that we tried to emphasize or measure seriousness or probability of outcome was to first do those applicants that have a pre-filing before FERC, and that's when you start to spend very large quantities of dollars. So we push those to the front of the queue, the rest to the back of the queue. There are any number of algorithms one could try to come up with to say, well, this company is more serious than that one, or they got a better project than this one. We opted not to do that. We said we're not going to try to judge the seriousness of companies or their business model or their probability of financing, because that's not our job. So we wanted something in terms of fairness to say, well, you know, we think that generally the idea that the company that got in the queue first should go first was generally fair.
Did they know that in advance, that this was going to be a first come, first served?
There was no process in place, Mr. Chairman. This is brand new ground.
If someone did more research and took more time to fill out their application, they ended up at the back of the line. They just didn't know at that point.
Well, again, Mr. Chairman, this is a new process that we are literally creating from whole cloth.
Listen, I completely appreciate you have a difficult job in this, and I completely appreciate this, and I know you're working through it expeditiously. But at the end of the day, everyone, all of us in the dais, you, everybody's going to have to determine and be able to say to people, this was a fair process that worked as expeditious as possible. I've gone way over time on this. I'd like to recognize Mrs. Spear on this.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me say to both of you, Mr. Smith, and to you, Mr. Chairman, you've done yeoman work on behalf of each of your interests here this afternoon. You, Mr. Smith, in terms of recognizing that it's a judicial process and that you cannot really offer a lot of information about particular applications, and Mr. Langford for pitching for his constituents as well. So I compliment both of you. Let me just say, though, on your point about winners and losers and whether or not someone has the ability to actually take this approval and move forward with it, it appears that they have done just that. If you've put them in 2 categories, those that have already done some pre-certification through FERC, they're in the front of the queue, you just said. Is that correct?
Yes, that is the case. Those are being considered first. And again, that's not a capricious determination. I mean, those are the companies that are already spending millions and millions of dollars on feed and pre-feed and all the other things they have to do in terms of determining environmental impact. So those are companies that they're making a real investment. They're spending dollars now. And so the one determinant, like I said, we didn't go and try to grade each company, but we did create 2 categories, and we thought that was a fair way to approach it.
All right. Let me also ask the question about, there are many folks in the oil and gas industry that will go out there, get the permits, and they just sit on them. And that's not what I think any of us are interested in. So how do we prevent that from being part of this extended evaluation as to the merits of how much is eligible to be exported versus not?
Okay. Well, thank you for the question. So the Department has some flexibility and some leeway in the way it writes its orders. One thing to emphasize is that when we write an order, when we say yes or no, we don't write yes or no on a sticky and say that's a decision. There's actually a 100-plus page order the Department comes out with that goes through in a very open and transparent and defendable way the rationale that the Department's gone through to get to that order. And it also, we've got the flexibility and the discretion to put in qualifying or requirements for the companies. So if you look back to how we manage the Sabine Pass order for Cheniere, there was a requirement that by a certain date they had to have first gas going through the terminal, which essentially prevents a company from going in and for a relatively low price,
$50.
yeah, $50, obtaining an application which they can sit on ad infinitum. That's not in the public interest. That's not what we wanted to accomplish.
Thank you.
So that's how we manage that.
All right. Mr. Ciccio, you've been very helpful and have really raised some interesting issues. Can you just list out some of the companies that you represent?
Actually, no. We do not list our companies on our website. We do not publish them. And the reason why is that we work on some very delicate environmental issues, and many of our companies have retail profiles, and we try to protect them from having that exposure. IECA represents a trade association and the accumulative views and consensus of those companies. And so we speak as an organization, not speaking in behalf of a company.
Okay, so I understand that, but for us to evaluate the impact on companies making it in America, where you talked about the American renaissance of manufacturing, which we all embrace. I mean, we want products made in America. I do a Make It in America forum in my district every year. So I just want to get a sense of how many employees are we talking about? Are these Fortune 500 companies? Can you
Sure.
give me, play 20 questions with me?
Our companies have over $1 trillion in revenues. They employ 1.4 million people. They have over 1,000 of some of the largest manufacturing facilities in the United States. These are large companies. They produce steel, aluminum, chemicals, plastics, nitrogen fertilizer, glass, cement, food processing companies. I mean, these are all name brand companies.
And you said how many employees in total?
1.4 million.
1.4 million, okay. And then you also indicated that while the export contracts typically are for 30 years, that is not the case. Could you elaborate on that? It's not the case for manufacturing companies within the United States.
No, yeah, manufacturing companies would love to lock in long-term, particularly fixed or advantaged natural gas prices, but for the most part, that's not happening. They are having to buy natural gas prices on the spot market.
So typically that's a decision being made by the actual utility that's offering you the gas, or?
No, this is a negotiation that can occur between a manufacturing company and a natural gas producer or marketer. Utilities are not part of the equation.
All right. So this is a producer who's basically saying, no, we're not going to lock in a 30-year contract to you, but in an export setting, they could.
Well, when I referred to 30 years in my earlier comment, I was referring to the DOE approving a application. The terminal owner then is going to secure long-term contracts, okay? And they have that ability for 30 years. And the point I was trying to make earlier is, so that creates demand that is going to impact domestic consumer prices for a period of 30 years. And my point is still the same. Natural gas is different than other trade products because it is can be drastically impacted by public policy, by Congress, and by the environmental EPA, by the Bureau of Land Management, that can impact the production over that 30 years or drive consumption, such as the EPA on utilities, on the industrial sector, controlling greenhouse gas emissions, the Industrial Boiler Act. It's going to drive, public policy does drive demand and can impact supply.
All right. Mr. Chairman, my time has expired, but I just want to thank all of the witnesses for their testimony. It has been, I think, a very enlightening hearing, and I think what's coming of it, for me certainly, is that this is a process that has to be done carefully, and one that probably, in my mind, should provide for some level of export, but not to the detriment of manufacturing here in this country, nor consumers in this country. And unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, I have to depart to give a speech, so I thank you.
I totally understand. Dr. Fleming, did you have another serious question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'll say parenthetically before I get to my question, EPA government policy can and have impact on any of these natural resources. Certainly, coal is a great example of where that's happening today. So, again, I have difficulty seeing where natural gas is unique. Mr. Smith, NERA issued NERA issued a result of their study. I understand DOE received that this summer. Is that correct?
That is correct.
However, it was released from DOE in December. Can you account for that delay, sir?
Yeah, thank you, Congressman. First of all, I certainly would not characterize that as a delay. I mean, this is the NERA study here in my hand. So this was a significant and substantial economic study that's looking at quantifying the impact of an unprecedented activity here in the United States in terms of exporting hydrocarbons in the form of liquefied natural gas. So this study was received by the Department. It was requested by the Department as something to be responsive to our need to be judicious about quantifying public interest. So we did need some numbers. Once this was received, there was an intense process to understand the study, to ensure that it was clear and transparent, to ask clarifying questions, to make sure that this study, once entered in the public record, would be clear and responsive to the types of things that we need to understand as part of the public interest determination.
And who made that decision when to actually release it?
I made that decision.
Okay. So nothing that happened perhaps in, I don't know, November could have had any impact on that decision at all?
No. The study was released when I was prepared to release it and when we had done the work that we needed to do within the Department of Energy to make sure it was appropriate.
Mr. Ebinger, how do the transportation costs of LNG affect the price in the world market compared to domestic prices?
Thank you, Congressman. The transportation costs are, of course, extremely high. Right now, if we were looking at what could we deliver gas for example, if we were ready to export into the Japanese market, it would probably, the actual transportation cost would be somewhere in the neighborhood of $5 to $6 per million BTU. And of course, added on added on to the Henry Hub price, say, plus of course the cost of gasification and then regasification, I think most analysts would agree that we would probably be able to deliver gas into Japan today if we could export at somewhere between $9.50 to $10 a million BTU, significantly lower, of course, than the Japanese price.
Sure. So how would that compare against other forms of energy for Japan? Would that be a favorable price for them?
At that price, it would be a very favorable price for Japan.
Okay.
Because otherwise, of course, Japan imports almost everything.
Right.
And since the Fukushima accident, the closing of the nuclear power plants has added roughly 4 BCF a day to Japanese demand, killing them, because, of course, they are importing into a very high cost in a high cost market.
Right. Okay. So obviously, it's a very marketable concept to sell natural gas to Japan, up to and including all the delivery costs that go with that.
The concern would be, however, the longer we take to get some of our projects into the marketplace, if you believe that and I think some of us at the table have different views on this, but if you believe that the long-run implications of any U.S. LNG going in the market will be to begin to bring further competition, that the existing prices in Japan will begin to fall. Now, they won't fall probably down to $10, but they might fall to 12 or 13. So the competitiveness of the U.S., while still probably reasonable, is not going to be as great the longer we take to get LNG projects into the marketplace.
Right. How does that affect the U.S. exporters compared to competitors the U.S. exports compared to competitors in Qatar or African countries?
The big loser in this competitive LNG market down the road may be Australia, although most of the big projects they have coming in, they have long-term contracts for. But they are extremely high-cost producer. It's anticipated Qatar, of course, is the low-cost producer, bar none. although Australia will be volumetrically larger than Qatar when all the projects come in, it's anticipated that the new fields in East Africa will be extremely competitive into the Far Eastern market, and even some of the West African projects in Nigeria and Angola will probably find a competitive market there. But the big question mark, in my mind anyway, is will the Chinese and the Russians do some very, very large pipeline deals, because that would be extremely competitive in the Far Eastern market against any LNG.
Right. So what I'm really hearing is that we're seeing a tremendous worldwide opportunity with natural gas that will allow the growth of economies around the world where they will have very competitive energy prices, that they can be good producers for export, import, which will be good for consumers. Would that be a correct assumption?
It will not only be good for consumers, Congressman, but for those of us that do believe in climate change, it offers a unique opportunity to at least use a cleaner fossil fuel. It's not an answer clearly for the long run because it's still a CO2 emitting fuel, but we do get some breathing space on the carbon front.
Yeah, it's my understanding that just in the last 3 years, carbon emissions have dropped 15% across the U.S., and that's due directly to the conversion to natural gas. So really this is a win-win-win. We get better environment on the CO2 emissions. We get better prices for manufacturing and production, which means, well, in production, so we get better job environment, higher paying jobs, and then consumers get a better deal on the cost of energy. So I can't imagine what could be better for this nation or this world.
I would agree, and the irony is for those that were opposed to the U.S. signing the Kyoto Protocol, which of course we did not sign, ironically because of gas backing out coal, we have actually met the reduction targets that we would have been obligated to had we signed the Kyoto Protocol.
Imagine that. Thank you, sir.
Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I know this is a long afternoon. It got interrupted a couple different times by votes and other things, though. But I appreciate you coming here and the conversation that you have. I'd like to enter into the record the EIA, the NERA, the Deloitte, and the Brookings study. And Ms. Chisco, we had your study already attached to your testimony. Is that correct? Okay.
My written testimony.
Good. I want to make sure that was all added. The other studies, I want to be able to add them into the record. The issue that we have today is we have around $40 to $50 billion of private money on the sideline that our economy desperately needs. The best gift that we can put into our economy is certainty, to know the rules and to fulfill those rules. And so there's some gift of predictability as we walk through the process on it. Mr. Smith, you have a tall order, as we have talked about multiple times, and a delicate balancing act. You have somewhere between 300 and 186,000 different comments that have come into you that we have to sort through and to make a decision and predict what the future economy is going to be based off that. That's no simple thing. We understand that. But dates of when the decisions will be made, then a date for how that decisions can be done, and a process to expeditiously work through that is a huge difference to every company that has applied into it and to how we work through the process on it, whether that be number 2 or number 19 or 1 through 19, whatever it may be, to know that they're not 6 years behind the other one because they were 2 days behind them in submitting an application. To know that there is some sort of process that's going to work through that's really fair to everyone, but it's also clearly defined. So we don't envy you in that process, but we're grateful that you're taking it on, and we do look forward in the days ahead of hearing a clear timeline and a clear process, and so we'll be able to receive that. And if at any point you need to communicate with this committee or we can help you in any way, we want to be an asset to you because of that responsibility. So did you have a final statement? You're leaning forward into that?
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, that I appreciate that comment, that we're moving forward with all due haste. So we understand that sense of urgency.
Thank you. And with that, we are adjourned.